I'm Patricia, and I've got a terrible story for you. Well, the story itself is quite typical, but the circumstances makes it really trashy. You'd really put it to use if you were a filmmaker, I suppose. My family is rich. Of course, we're not billionaires, and you won't find us in the Forbes list. Still, we've got a mansion in the nicest part of Miami, several yachts, and some cool cars in the garage. All this belongs to my parents, not to me. But I've already met several thugs who've tried to get to my mom and dad's wallets through me. That's how I got used to being alone since I was a child. And I can recognize those who are only interested in my money as soon as they start talking. My parents were always busy with anything except my upbringing, so they took care of it by hiring a nanny, a woman who lived in our house, and well, nursed me. Her responsibilities included catering to any of my whims and controlling my studies. Some think that a child from a rich family isn't obligated to study. Well, that's not my case. I've been constantly studying since my childhood. When I was 3, I already spoke 2 languages with ease. At the age of 5, I was able to read, write, and paint with watercolors. As a 7-year-old girl, I was already an expert in etiquette, knew how to dance, rode a little fat pony named Cookie, and did a lot of other activities. Mind you, those were still my preschool years. My parents never allowed me to do whatever I wanted just because we were rich. My peers at school had as much fun as they wanted and never actually bothered themselves. Their thoughts were occupied with the best flights and parties for weekends and yacht cruises during the holidays. A majority of them lived careless lives since they were 11 years old or so. In fact, they often received grades only because they were present at classes. My parents were different. The older I got, the more they were trying to control my grades and studies. Of course, they rarely bothered to check everything themselves. But the same nanny, a teacher hired for this exact reason, and personal tutors sent them reports every day. So I was forced to cram. Dad had a special gimmick. He used to ambush me in the hallway and run a speed test. Usually, he asked me several questions on literature or history, and sometimes he threw a math problem at me. I had to give him an answer in 10 seconds. If I failed to provide him with a correct answer, it costed me all of my pocket money. With a life like this, I turned into a local nerd and crammer, far from a school celebrity. I've managed to obtain a romantic relationship only in high school. The guy was not one of my classmates. He was an ordinary boy, my peer, who worked as a barista in my favorite cafe. We talked several times, and then we started dating. I liked that he was just a simple, ordinary guy. Besides, he wasn't interested in my money. In fact, Mark immediately told me that he couldn't afford to take me to expensive restaurants and asked me not to take him there on my terms, 'cause letting me pay for us both was humiliating for him. Because of that, he advised me to find another guy if I wasn't okay with picnics in the countryside and movies once a week. Well, it suited me just fine. I even fell in love with this peculiar charm of a simple life. Mom once told me that this was not for long, and soon I'd be asking him for something that he'd be unable to give me. She also predicted that one day I would understand that me and Mark were from different worlds, and our love will end. Yet, I didn't want to believe her, and continued dating Mark. By that time, my nanny retrained into a housekeeper, and was put in charge of maids, cooks, and other workers. I intersected with her much less than before, but I still considered her to be my closest friend. In fact, she was more of a family to me than even my parents. And of course, I told her everything and asked her for advice about my relationship. And then I brought Mark home for a first meeting with my parents. Mom and Dad only looked at him once or twice, and then completely forgot about him. They just began to chat with each other about their own problems right at the dinner table, and paid no attention to us whatsoever. I knew that it was their normal behavior and kind of rolled with that. Mark, however, he seemed to think that that was their signal to him. Now, he became sure that he was considered unworthy of me. So, I decided to somehow gloss over my boyfriend's first impression of my family and introduced him to my nanny. She piled him with questions. It was a real interrogation. She asked him about his attitude towards me, our prospects, and plans for the future, and somehow Mark still left pleased. And later, I noticed that Mark distanced himself from me. He pretended to be busy, told me that he had a lot of work to do, that he had to meet with friends, and so on and so forth. Yet somehow, he managed to find time for all of that earlier and still date me, and now he wasn't able to spend any time with me at all. And the nanny changed as well. You see, I was somehow used to the fact that she was always nearby. I paid zero attention to her appearance or behavior outside of our chats. But now she began to bloom like a rose, and I suddenly noticed that she was only 40 years old, even younger than my mom, and that she was still quite a pretty woman. We had a talk, and she admitted that she had found a boyfriend. I was very glad for her because she definitely deserved personal happiness. I even presented her with some of my old collection dresses so that she could impress her boyfriend with her looks. Our figures were more or less similar at the moment, so everything went out fine. My life went on. Everything seemed to be perfect, until Mark suddenly broke up with me. That day, I rushed to Nanny in tears looking for comfort and advice, and I didn't find her. I saw both of them instead, lying on the bed in her room, and Mark kissed her the way he never kissed me, with so much love and passion. It was a real nightmare. That day, my heart broke twice. First from the breakup with my beloved, and then from my nanny's betrayal. And that betrayal was much more painful. I simply deleted Mark from my life, and Dad fired the nanny as soon as I asked him to do so and explain the situation. Of course, she tried to explain herself. She even had the nerve to say that she was not guilty of anything, but I didn't want to listen to her excuses. I trusted her and she betrayed me.
My name is Barbara, and I'm Pat's former nanny. Here is my vision of what happened to us. Decide for yourself whether I really deserved condemnation or not. I raised Pat from birth. I was 23 and just graduated when her parents found me and offered me a lucrative job. And I spent all of my youth on the upbringing of this girl. I loved her, yes, but she wasn't my daughter, and that says it all. The terms of my contract were quite oppressive. I simply did not have the opportunity to date someone or, moreover, to start my own family. And I've been always dreaming about a large family with a loving husband and many kids. Pat became a surrogate child of sorts to me. I tried to replace her mother, read her bedtime stories, held her hand when she was ill, and catered to all of her whims. Sometimes even in contravention with her parents' direct instructions. I thought that the girl deserved some happiness. When Pat grew up, they still didn't fire me. Her parents offered me a higher salary, better conditions, even made me a housekeeper as a sign of gratitude. But I didn't stay because of that. I stayed because I wanted to be near Pat. I'm sure that my girl loved me too. I was her mom, psychologist, and best friend at the same time. Although I certainly wanted her to communicate more with peers and boys, I was still pleased that she did not turn away from me with age. And then she found Mark. I was glad that Pat finally had someone close to her except me. Until I met him personally, that is. He was only 17, just like Pat, but he seemed to be very smart, and he talked like he'd seen much. Of course, I was not going to woo him. The very idea seemed ridiculous. After all, he was still a young boy, and I looked like an old woman compared to him. Besides, Pat was like a daughter to me, and I could not do such a rotten thing to her. But Mark couldn't be bothered with such trifles as age or different social status. He came to me himself, asked me to meet him at the back door in secret from Pat and her parents, and told me that he loved me. I literally tried to drive him away with a broom. I was afraid that someone had seen him. The gossiping maids, Pat's parents, Patricia herself, after all. But at some point, I really wanted to believe him. And it was my big but very happy mistake. Yes, I'm aware that we've got a pretty large age difference, but due to his age, he could have been my son. That in my age, I should have been thinking about the soul and not looking at young boys. But when a woman had long ago gave up her happiness, and then it unexpectedly came to her itself by literally knocking on her door, Nothing really mattered anymore. I've been dreaming about it my whole life. I had to choose between Pat and my own happiness, and I selfishly chose myself. More precisely, it was Mark who chose me, and I just let the thing slide. And I still blame myself for it. But you see, Patricia is young, and she has her whole life waiting ahead of her, and there will be many more guys who want to be with her. I really wish her to find that one and only in the future. And this was my last chance for happiness, so I went for it. You can judge me, scold me. You can tell me that I'm initially wrong. I already know this and continue to blame myself for my weakness. But at the same time, I know that I really deserve to be loved for all those lonely years. Choose your side and write your thoughts in the comments. Share the video with friends, leave likes, and try to imagine yourself in the place of its characters. What would you do if you were Barbara, Mark, or Pat?